everybody, how are you? It's me, Classic ASMR 1. I think that's what I'm called. I should have checked really. Anyway, it's nice to be back with you, and I've not been quite as regular as I intended to be at the start of this year. But I have something here I'd like to share with you. Let's move my RSC coaster out of the way. I was actually going to demonstrate a smart writing set until I realised that to do it properly I needed my phone. And guess what my phone's doing at the moment? Yes, it's filming this. If this channel does do any good, I might have to try and get a proper camera. Some kind of decent gear. But in the meantime, this is aimed kind of more at writers, but also anyone with an interest in reading. I hope you'll find it of interest. As I mentioned, we're trying to monetize, I think is the word, this channel, and then to use that income to commission some new writing, which we would then read here, or I'd find someone else to read in a ASMR kind of relaxing style. And I've mentioned many times, I first came across ASMR when I had COVID. That and the aliens that came to talk to me. I had quite a high temperature, I think. But anyway, enough about me. Let's get on with this, because I hope you'll find this interesting. It's quite an old book, and it's called Writers at Work. And it's a compilation of the reviews, or say interviews, in a magazine called the Paris Review. And I thought it might be of interest to share this. So let's have a quick look. Blank page. Obviously the title page. Writers at Work. You've got that bit, haven't you? Yeah. The Paris Review interviews an introduction by Malcolm Cowley, who was also a writer, and as you can see, published in London by Secker and Warburg in 1958. And there's the contents, which I think you might find of interest. Obviously there's the copyright notices. I think we're okay with this. Let me know if not. But these are the contents. As you can see, there's an introduction, and I will read some of the introduction because it's quite fascinating in many ways. And these are the writers that the magazine interviewed. Excuse me. You can see some very, very famous names down here. EM Forster, Francois Morag, I don't know that one, which is why I can't pronounce it properly. Dorothy Parker, obviously, James Thurber, Thornton Wilder, William Faulkner. I'm picking out the big names that I know here. Angus Wilson, and of course Truman Capote. Breakfast at Tiffany's, anyone? And we'll be looking at some of the things that these incredible talents talked about in the Paris magazine. But I'll read you a little bit of the introduction because it is quite interesting. So, sorry, out of focus there. Introduction. How writers write. This is the best series of interviews with writers of our time that I have read in English. The statement, though, isn't sweeping. Sorry, though sweeping isn't quite so eugenistic as it sounds. As compared with continental Europeans, the English since Boswell, who was Scottish, of course, and the Americans from the beginning have seldom been good at literary interviews. Everything in their background has been against the development of the form. Editors haven't been willing to give it much space because of a probably justified feeling that their public was not interested in literary problems. authors have been embarrassed or reticent, often at the wrong places, and interviewers, by and large, have been incompetent. I can think of recent exceptions, but most of the interviewers either have had no serious interest in literature, or else have been too serious about themselves. Either they have been reporters with little knowledge of the author's work and a desire to entrap him into making scandalous remarks about sex, politics and God, or else they have been ambitious writers trying to display their own sophistication, usually at the expense of the author, and listening chiefly to their own voices. In this book, the literary conversations are of a different order, perhaps because of the changing times. The interviewers belong to a new generation that has been called silent, though a better word for it would be waiting or listening or inquiring. They have done their assigned reading. They have asked the right questions, or most of them, and have listened carefully to the answers. The authors, more conscious of their craft than authors used to be, have talked about it with an engaging lack of stuffiness. I'll continue because I find this quite fascinating. The editors of the Paris Review, of the Paris Review, have been generous with their time and space, and the result is a series that seems to me livelier and more revealing than others of its kind. Unlike most of the others, it is concerned primarily with the craft of fiction. It tells us what fiction writers are as persons, where they get their material, how they work from day to day, and what they dream of writing. The series started with the first issue of the Paris Review in the spring of 1954. The new quarterly had been founded by young men lately out of college who were in Europe working on their first novels or books of poems. Their dreams of having a magazine of their very own must have been more luminous than their picture of what it should be. Yet they did have a picture of sorts. They didn't want their magazine to be little or opinionated. Oh gosh, in the slang of the year, I've probably said that wrong. Or academic. Instead of printing what were then the obligatory essays on Moby Dick and Henry James's major phase, they would print stories and poems by new authors, and pay for them too, as long as the magazine kept going. They wanted to keep it going for a long time, even if its capital was only $1,000, with no subventions in sight. They dreamed that energy and ingenuity might take the place of missing resources. You've got to kind of love that spirit, haven't you, really? As someone who works in the arts and writes a bit, yeah, there's quite a lot there. I'll do a little more of this issue. I find it of interest. At this point, the Paris Review took a different direction from that of other magazines published by Americans in Europe. Like them, it wanted to present material that was new, uncommercial, and, quote, making no compromise with the public taste, quote, in the phase sanctioned by the Little Review. But unlike the others, it was willing to use commercial devices in getting the material printed, and talked about enterprise in the service of art, unquote, might have been its motto rather. The editors compiled a list running to thousands of names of Americans living in Paris and sent volunteer salesmen to ring their doorbells. Posters were printed by hundreds, and flying squadrons of 3 went out by night to paste them in likely and unlikely places all over the city. In June 1957, the frayed remnants of one poster were still legible on the ceiling of the lavatory in the Café du Dôme. That kind of enthusiasm reminds me a little bit of how things are at the Edinburgh Festival each year, the Edinburgh Fringe. We're a bit more online now, aren't we? But still, go down the Royal Mile any August and you'll be assaulted by hundreds of people handing out flyers. Occasionally, me being one of them. The series of interviews was at first regarded as another device, more dignified and perhaps more effective too, for building circulation. The magazine needed famous names on the cover, but couldn't afford to pay for the contributions of famous authors. Quote, "So let's talk to them," unquote, somebody ventured. It must have been Peter Mathias, and I think that was Mathias, or Howard Humes, since they laid the earliest plans for the review. Let's see it okay there. Quote, "And print what they say." The idea was discussed with George Plimpton, late of the Harvard Lampoon, who had agreed to be editor. Plimpton was then at King's College, Cambridge, and he suggested EM Forster, an honorary fellow of King's, as the first author to be interviewed. Good call. It was Forster himself who gave a new direction to the series, making it a more thoughtful discussion of the craft of fiction than had at first been planned. Forster began by saying that he would answer questions if they were given to him in advance, so that he could brood over them. The questions were submitted, and a few days later, when the interviewers appeared, Forster gave his answers so methodically and slowly that his guests had no trouble keeping up with him. It was a simple interview to transcribe, and it furnished the best of patterns for the series that followed. This is quite interesting too, having done interviews myself. Interviewers usually worked in pairs like FBI agents, since no recording equipment was available for the interviews. They both jotted down the answers to their questions at top speed and matched the two versions afterwards. With two men writing, the pace could be kept almost at the level of natural conversation. Some of the later interviews, with Frank O'Connor for example, were done with a tape recorder. After 2 or 3 sessions, the interviewers typed up their material. Then it was cut to length, arranged in logical order, and sent to the author for his approval. Wow. I'm not sure that would happen nowadays. Sometimes he took a special interest in the text and expanded it with new questions of his own. There were important additions to some interviews, including those with Mauriac, Faulkner and Moravia, while this volume was being edited. What are we doing for time? Next paragraph, I think. It seems strange that famous authors could have devoted so much of their time to a project from which they had nothing to gain. Some of them disliked the idea of being interviewed, but consented anyway, either out of friendship for someone on the review, or because they wanted to help a struggling magazine of the arts, perhaps in memory of their own early struggles to get published. Still the same today, of course. Others, notably Simeon, Carey, Warren, and O'Connor, were interested in the creative process and glad to talk about it. Not one of the interviewers had any professional experience in the field, but perhaps their inexperience and youth were positive advantages. Authors are sometimes like tomcats. They distrust all the other toms, but they are kind to kittens. Fascinating, isn't it? And it's I say an interesting book that I came across almost by accident. And I'm not sure, I don't think there are any photos in it. I should have had a look, shouldn't I? But as I say, some of the literary names in this are fascinating. And did arguably some of the best writing in the world. And if you'd like to know a bit more about it, then please do let me know in the comments. As you know, I'll try and keep these videos not too long. And mainly because I tend to listen to ASMR at night and drift off to sleep. are some fantastic stories in here. William Faulkner, James Thurber, Dorothy Parker, and as I say, I might return to these if you're okay with that. So I'll leave it here for now. With writers at work, and wish you a very relaxing time. I'd say evening, but I've no idea what time it is where you are. But I will also say thank you so much for your company. And if you haven't subscribed, if you could press the little button down here somewhere, you know how to do it, don't you? As it would be a great help. I'm not sure if you can share these either, but anything you can do would be much appreciated. Thank you for your lovely comments in the past. And I shall see, I'm going to be more regular now. I might do a little bit more with this book as well. Certainly some of the interviews with the authors, the famous authors. So once again, thank you for your company. And as always, the words of Charles Dickens, bless us all, everyone.